Data Storytellers. Today, I'm here with Neil Biehn, who's the Vice President of Business Analytics over at Siemens Healthineers. Great to have you with us, Neil.
Thanks for having me.
Just to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your current role, that kind of stuff. Let's have a bit of context from you.
Sure. Well, I actually started in this space back in 2001. I got my PhD from NC State University in Applied Mathematics and Operations Research, and jumped right into the industry, joined a startup in pricing called Pros, and it was a great experience. I joined as an associate junior base level scientist. So there was analytics and data science weren't words back then yet. They weren't even invented. So we were just called scientists. And we just started to get on successful projects and became manager in 2007, senior director 2008, and vice president 2010. And really worked closely in the airline space, travel industry, and also a lot of B2B negotiated pricing. And all of it, I was responsible for the science, the statistics, and the analytics behind how that software worked. Left in 2015. It's the young man's game, Paul. At some point, you gotta give it up. I was a million miler and in the air, so it was good to kind of come and move back to North Carolina and Siemens Healthineers. Joined there in 2015, and it was great to take all the experience I've learned, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about, and help to build a team here for the last 7 years. So I have 20 people on the team, and we're focused on analytics and data science to support both service and finance.
Awesome. So, you mentioned that back in the day, it wasn't called analytics or data science.
Right.
When you were going through that evolution, what made you keep working in this space?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, you've talked to so many leaders, right? And you see the passion that people have for this stuff and how much impact you have. And it's something you see early on when you start doing it. And it's addictive, I think. And then all of a sudden, what you do becomes the sexiest job of the 21st century. It's kind of fun to go through that transformation where this is becoming huge, right? I mean, massive. I remember when Tom Davenport sort of first wrote a book on it in maybe 2004, 2005. It really became something that was gaining some momentum. And of course, you believe this because you do it too. And so, it was great. I mean, how much fun, very rewarding in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you have a significant team of analytics professionals, data science professionals. How do you see the state of data analytics as we sit here in 2022? What do you think about the state of the data function and the general progress of data-driven business transformation in the corporate world?
Yeah, I think we've moved past that initial stage, early adopter stage. I think at this point, it's pretty clear that if you're a business, you need to have these types of teams. 7 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe not, right? There were probably some people who didn't maybe think that this was important. It was still reporting. But now I think it's table stakes, or, you got to have it. And so that's neat. That's a new era for us in this world where we're a critical part of, I would say, almost every business you can think of. So that's cool, but we're still maturing, right? It's not over. There's a lot to go and learn. I mean, I was reading an MIT Sloan article this spring, and 80% of projects still fail. That seems surprising to me, but you can understand that I think executives are still a little befuddled on exactly how to use data scientists and AI and analytics teams to make a big difference. And they read the articles, they see how others are doing it well, and they don't want to be left behind. So there's still a transition in the maturing phase that's happening.
And where do you think these big opportunities are for companies who are ambitious and leaders who are ambitious in taking data to the next level, let's say?
So let me qualify your question. Maybe you could say it a different way. How are executives handling this ability to say, okay, where's my data scientist group? I need them. Yeah, I mean, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's actually a great question.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's difficult, right? Because I think something that me and you talked about in prep is, what kind of leader are you looking for in a data science organization? And I think that's the number one question executives have to answer, right? Someone's got to figure this out. And I'm not trained in this area, right? So the first thing is to find people who have some expertise and know how to do this stuff, right? And then you got to have them build teams and then trust them to take it to the right place. And yet you desperately need it to go well too. So I think finding a way to build these teams out and help make them successful, I think is the hardest part of this whole journey.
So for you specifically, is that the hardest part of being a data leader? Is it building these teams with differing personalities, differing people, and telling the right story to bring people on board? Do you think there's other challenges that kind of run off the back of that as well?
Not as much. I mean, if you walk around the country in the United States and Canada, I would imagine, I don't know of a university that doesn't have a data science and analytics program these days, right? So finding talent is actually not terribly hard to do. And they usually come out with a lot of passion. And again, they see it's the number one job on, LinkedIn or Glassdoor or whatever. And so I think the talent actually is the easier. I think the hardest part for a leader is managing both executive temperament and what's happening at the executive level, and then pointing your team all in the same direction and trying to get everybody aligned. I think that's really where the challenges take place. And yes, it does help to have a good story, by the way, when you're hiring, because you want the best people, of course.
Well, that's right. And I think that what you're alluding to there is actually helping empowering the data analytics team to become more business facing, right? And what do you think are some of the best ways for your team members to actually gain more influence within the business?
That's such a crucial question, right? First of all, to anyone who's an analytics professional or coming out of school interested in doing this, you've got to learn the business, right? I mean, it's like a scientist. One of the things I think people don't understand is, especially at the executive level, is that this is science, right? The scientific method is at play. And scientific method doesn't work like typical business stuff, right? You're learning, you're trying, you're experimenting. You've got hypotheses on what might happen, but you don't even know really how it's going to work out. And that's not typical when you think of a standard project plan or standard deadlines. And on the opposite side, the scientists coming out think that they're going to play with data and that there's just going to be in these tools running regressions or building dashboards. And the reality is you've got to learn the business. You've got to understand the business in such a deep and fundamental way to really understand how you're going to build problems and solve problems.
So how do you go about empowering the team to do that?
Well, the first is that's the expectation, right? So there's not any question about it. Everybody on my team has let's say an internal business customer, right? They meet on a regular basis. Sometimes it's daily if it's kind of a bit of an intense project. Usually it's more weekly or bi-weekly. And those meetings happen no matter what. You're in tune with your business partner. It's just the expectation that's set. And you talk in business language and you are part of the business. And the team does a great job of that.
So what qualities do you see in the people who are good at this, those who inspire that real change? They really nailed this connection. What qualities do you see that those who are successful in this role?
Yeah, a real desire to want to know the business, right? I mean, it's interesting, right? It's part of the problem when you look at data science and analytics. How does the problem shake out? So I'm obviously a little focused on sort of B2B side of things. Been in B2B my whole life. It can be a little different, I think, if your job is, really technology oriented, embedding AI into a driverless car or something, right? That's maybe a different issue. But in B2B, the business is the problem. The business is the car, or if you will, right? It is the thing you're trying to understand and learn so that you can produce solutions to make it better. And what you see from people is that they don't see a difference between learning the details of a really interesting business problem and learning the details behind a really cool science algorithm or a really cool new way to get data and display it, or a cool visualization. They don't see the difference between the two. It's all part of being who you are as a data scientist and as an analytics professional.
That's a great point, desire, and I think that also ties into a lot about how you balance the line between being humble, learning to adapt to the specific business needs, but also the courage and assertiveness to push back when there is something good going on at the back end, and it's kind of hard to, if you will, to pitch the business on that. So how do you think that these two aspects of desire can kind of work in concert with each other?
Yeah, I think it's good. Let me talk about it from the business perspective, because I think it's really interesting. One of the things we laugh about a lot here is I'll do something that takes an hour. I'll put it in a dashboard and the business will just be in awe. Wow, look at all that. Look at that. I can't believe you guys can put that together. And meanwhile, you're thinking to yourself, like, that was the easiest thing I've done in the last month. And then you struggle mightily in the back end of the data. You just can't get the data to get the two data sets to work properly together. The regressions aren't telling you anything. It's just nothing seems to be working. And the leaders are going, what is taking so long, right? I thought this was an easy thing for you to do. I thought you were good at this, right? And so, managing that expectation. And so, they don't understand necessarily what you do. So having a lot of open communication, being very clear, meeting very frequently, get into the details a little bit about what you're trying to do and the progress you are making, I think is really crucial, right? At setting that desire to say, I need a solution. I need this business problem solved, helping them to get it done and showing them what's actually happening under the covers. Don't go away for a month and struggle, right? Let them know you're struggling, show them how you're struggling.
So who should be proactive in that case? Should that be the data team or the business team?
I think the data team has to be the proactive one, but if you don't get the response or the communication level from the business, you got to stand up and say, I guess this isn't important to you, right? Because if they're not involved, or they want to walk away and have you noodle on the problem and just come back with some magical solution in 3 months, that's just not how this stuff works. It just doesn't work that way. You build something, you show the progress, people go, oh, that's cool, but that's not quite what I was thinking. There's something else you need to learn to really understand the problem. And you learn and you go, oh, I see it. And you start to go down a little bit of a different path, right? And that's how this stuff actually works. So if they're not there giving you that feedback, saying, yes, that's perfect, or no, that doesn't make sense, or you forgot about this other thing, or I never told you about this other thing, you're gonna have a lot of delays and waste, right? And you want to minimize that waste. And their involvement is a big part of that.
Yeah, it's super interesting because we've been working with the organization for like 18 months, been working with data leaders for many years now. And when we were first conceptualizing, okay, what is data storytelling? What are the data storytellers? We actually focused it more on the business storytelling problem, because it's easy to say, oh, the data team isn't communicating with the business. But as you rightly pointed out, when you're not getting that feedback and you're kind of seen as a tool to achieve an end, as opposed to a human being with drive and ambition and motivations, then there needs to be that storytelling on both ends, on the data team and the business team, right?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, we're on the data storytellers, right? So probably should talk about storytelling. Yeah, I mean, obviously, yes, telling a story is huge, right? People want to know why you did what you did. What is this supposed to be telling me? How do I use it? What's its purpose? What's the business problem it's trying to solve? It's so crucial to be able to talk about the situation and what is currently going on and why what you're doing matters. It's beyond important that people hear it, right? And in fact, it's so much so that I highly recommend that people in this field take either some sort of public speaking training, something that allows them to really make an impact when they're trying to tell other people what it is they do or what this solution is here for. And it not only helps you in actual public speaking or actually having those conversations about to other people to be clear about what's going on, but it actually helps you in the front end, because as you go to solve the problem, if you're actually thinking about how you're going to present it, you need to know what the business problem actually is. You need to know the situation you're in to kind of tee up, right? That, that part of the story where you're mired and things aren't going well, and we have a way out, right? And here's what that way out is. And I also think if you can just find, some people say everyone should be a waiter at some point in their life, right? I feel like everybody should be a salesperson at some point in their life, right? Because you're absolutely forced to do this. You will not sell a thing if you don't have this ability to sort of tell a story about why somebody needs something or why something's important. So any skill an analytics team can have in this regard is really, really important.
And to get out of the tunnel vision and do it in the right way, right? If you're a data leader, you can easily get lost in the weeds, I would say. Whereas a good story tends to be, I would say, concise. It has a big idea, it has how it's going to affect you, because people aren't really interested in what's going on in someone else's life at the end of the day. They're very, by nature, we're very self-centered people. So to actually turn that story into how is this going to help you? How if we don't do it, is going to hinder you? It takes a certain level of communications and influence and persuasive skill. So in the past, how have these skills played into your success as a professional throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I mentioned sales. So when I became the senior director and then vice president at Pros back in 2008, 2010, there was a desire in the sales cycle for our customers to say, hey, okay, so you're telling me about all this great science and all this really cool analytics behind the scenes that is driving the value that I'm going to receive. I'd like to talk to your head scientist and say, hear from them how this is all going to work and how this benefits me. And I had to learn quick on how to stand on my feet, take objections and turn them into positive answers, and show the value and tell the story. I think that's that training. It's like boot camp. I mean, you got to learn fast, and you get good at it. You have a lot of material, and it becomes really, really important to be able to speak clearly and to tell great stories. And I think part of that is having both facts and also just simple ideas about how you've shown that you've thought about this before. When you say something out loud, people think, oh, that's interesting, right? When you say it, but it's on a slide, it's a little bit more real, right? Or if they ask you a question and you send a 2-page document immediately back, they know you've thought about this before. You didn't just make this up, right? And I think there's something really powerful to that. So how come this isn't complete? Well, there's the problem with what you're trying to do, right? It doesn't come across great, but if I say, here's the reason, right? And it's laid out, all of a sudden, all this trust starts to be there. And I know you talk a lot about building relationships, that building that trust that the person can rely on you, and to when you tell that story, they're really listening and they believe you. That building those relationships, whether it's within the first 15 to 20 minutes, or even if it's with over years of working with someone, other executives want to know that they can trust you. So it's a big part of storytelling, actually.
Yeah, and I think that balancing that creativity and the enthusiasm for a good project, for example, you need to realize who you're speaking to. You're not speaking to a lot of times data-oriented people. You're speaking to people who can be quite, threat associated. They hear a new project that comes across as a threat, and that's a great trait to have, right? To be able to pressure test and to be able to see what someone else who's excited might not be able to see. At the same time, you want to be able to go back with the answer, and that's how you build the trust. Because if you get a question that you don't know the answer to, then that's kind of almost a red flag for these kind of people. So actually, when it comes to doing things like securing sponsorship, spreading data literacy throughout the business, changing the perspective of key stakeholders, this is all the wheels in motion. This is the meat of it, is telling a great story as well. When you mentioned trust there, which is really great, what do you think are some of the other ways to build and facilitate it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, right? I think you'll hear a lot from people that say, oh, you've got to build a lot of relationships at the C-suite level. You've got to earn their trust and so forth. And it's all great to say those things, but how do you actually do it? Right? And I think that's the hardest part. And where I see people make the biggest mistakes is they sort of think like, to be an executive, you have to act a certain way, or you have to, be really confident. And you see people just try to be someone they're not. And you see people with imposter syndrome, right? And these are things you've got to really practice and get out of doing, right? You be yourself. Everybody, when they puts their pants on one leg at a time, everybody has to eat to survive. I mean, the executives are just people. Everybody's just people, and just, get out of this notion that they're anybody different, and have fun and be honest and be open. If you make a mistake, own it, and just admit it, right? No one's perfect. Just really simple advice to people that I see, make a lot of mistakes because they think, if I'm going to talk to executives, I have to be somebody different. And this isn't really true at all. And when you are yourself, when you are actually having fun at this, most data science jobs are not life and death. Paul, some are, I guess. B2B, it's certainly not. And you just don't need to treat it like that, right? You can have fun and enjoy it and joke around and make it fun for the people around you. It really does create a lot of trust, and people want to work with you, right? They're like, oh yeah, it's great working with him or great working with her. They really get it, and it's successful and it's fun, and that's to me how you build strong relationships, right? And don't try to be someone you're not, whether it's by not telling the truth or just trying to pretend that you're super confident or anything like that.
Absolutely, and we don't like to put people in the bucket of data science or introverts here, because there's really good data science who are extroverts here, and I think you need to balance the line between being able to have those conversations in a proper manner, giving the gravitas they deserve, but at the same time without being insincere, without telling lies, without over promising and under delivering. These are all the kind of traits that we like to see in data champions in businesses. And actually, this kind of leads me on to my next question. You mentioned that you have a team of like 20 people. How would you describe your role as the vice president of business analytics within Siemens? Are you are you the data champion? Are you a team leader? Are you a data evangelist? Are you the data guy for Siemens? What would you contextualize that as?
Yeah, there's a bit of the data guy or data person. There's definitely some of that for sure, right? They call Neil, right? And then I get the phone calls and we go from there. Yes, I definitely play some expertise role as far as this stuff goes. So people will defer to me on certain topics, which is great. I certainly enjoy that. You got to be careful coming off too much of an expert, because the reality is we all have a lot to learn, right? So being curious is better, right? And just be happy they came to you. So I definitely play that role. On my team in particular, I act very much as a magnet to where we're going, to what's the future holds, get everybody aligned. When I first showed up, very, very sort of siloed. It was kind of an amalgamation of different groups throughout the business, right? And like take on reporting people, hire some new data scientists, put them all in a group, and they were going their different directions. And so my job was to sort of get them all pointed in the same direction, and have a vision and go, right? And create a culture, right? That was the biggest thing for me, is set the tone for a great culture. You can't have a winning, really successful data science if people are scared of being yelled at, afraid that that a failure is gonna bring down the wrath of their leadership. You've got to create a really safe and fun place to work for people. This is a great job, and these guys are incredibly motivated. So I don't need to motivate them. That's the easy part. I need to keep them happy, right? And feeling safe, and doing great things and getting rewarded for doing great things. That's my job.
Really interesting that the word you use there, set the tone for the culture, because we could sit here until the cows come home and talk about how do you create a culture of a data culture that's sustained. But actually, I think that the way you phrase it, setting the tone for what kind of culture you want to, everyone can do that, then that's a really good foundation for building a data-driven business culture, right? And I think that's really key. I also like what you said about, when I asked you what your role is, you say I'm a bit of this, a bit of that. But one thing you didn't say is that I'm a data nerd, and that's a really interesting brand that I think a lot of people are going down. But actually, that doesn't set the right tone. It doesn't set the right tone for the culture because it needs to be business facing. It doesn't set the right tone for you as an individual because no one wants to talk to a data nerd, right? So it's really interesting that the way you answered that and the actual roles that you gave were completely away from that. It's like I'm a data professional is what I would say, as opposed to like someone who just dabbles in data and sits behind a computer all day.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if I'm going to let you take the data nerd title away. No, I mean, it's all of it, right? I mean, I think that if there's one message I'd want you to get across, is that your desire to be a business person and your desire to be a data nerd they sound so different, but to do this job, they have to both be there.
Exactly. So when it comes to the setting the tone for the culture, then how do you approach educating the organization on this? How do you go about setting the tone?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really hard too. I mean, I work at Siemens, right? Very large company. And so you can't talk to everybody all the time and have all these one-to-one meetings about how important certain things are or learning certain tasks, but you do have interactions with leaders and individuals. And, the key is to talk about, one is the future state, and you're starting to see people grab data and do interesting things. The tools to make it easier for business people to do their own analysis are just getting better and better and better and easier to use. And you're starting to see them use them. And so when you have that opportunity where someone perks up and says, I'm interested in this, you got to seize it. You've got to take hold of it. You got to grab it, right? And if it's another executive, obviously you're doing that, right? They need you, but they're not going to be doing the work. I love mentoring people outside of our team who've raised their hand and said, this seems like there's something really important here. I latch right onto that. And if I can get evangelists in other groups, then I feel like the message is spreading. I can't spread the message in Siemens by myself. It's too big. But I can walk around and start spreading the message. And it's really interesting because the messages I was spreading over in Europe and other places around the company, I'm hearing come back to me now 3-4 years later, right? And so I think you just kind of keep talking to people who are interested in hearing about it and are interested in this topic. To me, that's the best way to do it. I guess grassroots or word of mouth, right? To some degree. And then if someone wants to engage with you, executive or not, take the time. What's a half hour to sit and talk with someone about how important this stuff is and answer their questions.
Interesting. So because it's word of mouth, how do you define data drivenness in that sense? How do you, when you go through these feedback loops, how do you then get to a point where, okay, we are data driven now?
Data driven is a word, right? It's a phrase, it's a label. I mean, I would say that I don't talk about data driven. I talk about it's data storytelling a lot, actually. And one of the things I'll usually stand up and tell people is, how do you know fact from fiction? Hey, what's going on over here? Something's not right. I got customers complaining or salespeople complaining. Something just isn't right. What's going on? And then somebody says, well, there's this thing happening and I couldn't find a parking spot, or like whatever, excuses or folklore about what's really happening. Is it true what they're telling you? How do you know? Or you just, what if it's the salesperson who told the sales leader, who then talked to the VP of sales, who then talked to the CFO? I mean, we've all played that game of grapevine. I mean, who knows how the story is going to end up evolving and what it really means. If you have the facts, though, about what's actually happening, all of a sudden the conversation can be laser focused on solving actual real problems because you see them right in front of you. And I think for me, that's kind of my go-to statement about, I guess, why you need to be data driven, right? Is you're going to make bad decisions because you're just listening to folklore. some of that folklore is accurate, some of it's not. And it's not by people are lying to you. It's just, it can't tell the whole story.
Well, Neil, it's been a fantastic conversation. What advice would you give for data analytics leaders today?
Oh my, so much, right? I mean, there's so much out there. I think I go back to culture, first of all, right? You got to have great culture. This thing almost runs itself if the culture is there. You as a leader, you're always going to have your role. But it becomes really easy when everyone's really inspired to do their work. They love their job. They know that you have their back and you're there to help them. And the people around you enjoy working with you. The business gets a lot of value out of you. It all comes back to that culture of your team and how you run your team. I really do. And so that would be my number one piece of advice. And then number two, you gotta grow, right? There's always growth. The technology in this space is unbelievable. And you got to keep up with it. You've got to enjoy it. And it's hard because you're trying to solve all these business problems, but now you got to use this new tool, or you got to figure out how to use this new tool. And I think that balance is always going to be there. And so embrace it, even though it's really hard.
Absolutely. Well, Neil, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Some really great insights there, and hope to have you on again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.